The ring wasn't hers to choose. The house wasn't hers to decorate, and the man sitting at the far end of the dining table, reading his correspondence without once looking up, wasn't hers in any sense that mattered. Nora Whitmore had learned to eat quietly. It was a skill no one taught you directly. You acquired it the way you acquired most things in a marriage like this, by watching what happened when you didn't. Her first week at Ashgrove, she had asked Clement Ashgrove whether he preferred the curtains drawn at supper. He had set down his fork. He had looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression of a man who had expected an object and received instead a person, and that had surprised him in ways he found inconvenient. After that, she ate quietly. She was 23 years old. She had been Mrs. Clement Ashgrove for 14 months, and every morning she sat at the window of her dressing room and watched the light come in over the south lawn and told herself that today she would find one thing that belonged entirely to her. She had not yet succeeded. Clement was not a cruel man. She wanted to be precise about that, because it mattered, and because she had spent considerable effort making sure she was precise. He did not raise his voice. He did not humiliate her in company. He paid the household accounts without question, and left her to manage the staff, which she did with the kind of methodical competence that surprised people who had known her before the marriage, when she was still the younger Whitmore daughter, and therefore the one nobody watched particularly closely. He was not cruel. He was simply absent in a way that occupied the whole house. His first wife had died 4 years before Nora arrived at Ashgrove. No one mentioned her directly, but she was there in the arrangement of the furniture, pieces that had clearly been moved and never moved back, and in the way Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper, sometimes began a sentence and stopped herself, and in the particular quality of Clement's silences, which were not the silences of a man at peace, but of a man who had decided that peace was not available to him, and had organized his life accordingly. Nora had not been told any of this before the wedding. Her mother had told her that Clement Ashgrove was steady, solvent, and respected in Harwick County. That he was 41 and had been married before was mentioned in the same tone. One might mention that a house had a north-facing parlor. A fact to be acknowledged and then set aside. She had met him twice before the engagement was announced. Both times he had been polite and correct and entirely uninformative. She had not known what to make of him. She had not been given enough time to try. That was 14 months ago. Now she knew that he took his coffee black and his decisions privately, that he woke before 5 and was in his study by 6. That he had a younger brother named George who visited twice a year and was everything Clement was not. Loud, careless, full of opinions about things he barely understood. And that something had happened between the two of them, years ago, that neither of them would name in front of her. She knew that he read until late. That he moved through the house as if he was always just passing through. That on the 3 occasions she had managed to make him laugh. Genuinely laugh. Not the polite kind. He had looked briefly startled by himself, as if laughter was a country he had emigrated from, and was not sure he was permitted to re-enter. She knew these things because she watched, because she had nothing else to do with the attention she had once planned to spend on her own life. It was a Tuesday in October when everything changed, though she didn't know it when she woke up. She was in the garden, cutting back the late roses, when she heard the carriage. She did not go in immediately. She finished what she was doing because the roses required it, and because she had developed the habit of completing small tasks fully. It was one of the few ways she could be certain of finishing anything. Then she stripped off her gloves and walked around to the front of the house. The woman standing in the drive was perhaps 50, dressed in charcoal traveling clothes, with the posture of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and rearranging them by force of presence alone. She was looking at the house with an expression Nora could not quite read. Clement was already outside. Nora saw him the moment she rounded the corner and she stopped, because she had never seen him stand like that before, very still in the way of a man bracing for something. George's mother-in-law, Mrs. Holt said quietly, appearing at Nora's elbow with the uncanny timing she had perfected over 30 years in the house. Mrs. Fenwick, she hasn't been here since. The housekeeper stopped. She hasn't been here in some time. Mrs. Fenwick turned her head and saw Nora. Whatever she had been expecting, it was not Nora. That much was immediately apparent. She looked at her for a moment with an assessment so complete it felt almost physical. "So," she said, "you're the one he replaced her with." Clement said, "Eleanor." It was the first time Nora had heard him use a woman's given name. The word came out flat and warning, and Mrs. Fenwick heard it and smiled in a way that meant she had decided to comply and was not pleased about it. "Mrs. Ashgrove," she said instead. "Correct now. I apologize. That was unkind. It was. But Nora had been handling unkindness for 14 months, so she said, "Please come inside, Mrs. Fenwick. You must be tired from the journey." She did not look at Clement. She led the way. Over tea, the situation became clear in the particular way that situations become clear when no one is willing to say the central thing directly. George, Clement's younger brother, had borrowed money. This was not new. George borrowed money the way other men breathed, without considering what came after. But this time the lender was not a private gentleman with patience and affection for George's enthusiasm. This time it was a man named Dodd who had no patience and no affection for anything except repayment, and the debt had grown to a number that made Nora set down her teacup very carefully. "George cannot pay it," Mrs. Fenwick said. She had the manner of a woman who had survived considerable disappointment by refusing to soften the edges of it. "He cannot cover a third of it, and Dodd is not a man who accepts installments." Clement said nothing. Mrs. Fenwick looked at him. "You know what he's capable of, Clement." "I know what he's capable of," Clement said. "George knows it too, which makes this particularly impressive. This is not the moment for." "I know what this moment is." Nora watched them. There was a whole conversation happening beneath the conversation, and she did not have the vocabulary for it yet. But she was a quick study. "How long has George known?" she asked. They both looked at her. She kept her expression even. "The debt," she said. "How long has he known the amount, and how long has he known that Dodd intended to collect?" A pause. 6 weeks, Mrs. Fenwick said. "The second notice came 6 weeks ago." "And he came to you then?" Nora said to Clement. Clement looked at her steadily. "No, he did not." "Then who did he go to first?" Another pause. Longer. "A man named Aldridge," Mrs. Fenwick said. "In Richmond." "Who turned him away?" Nora nodded slowly. She folded her hands in her lap and thought about what she was about to say, and whether she had the right to say it, and decided that she had been silent for 14 months and that was enough. "If George had come to you directly," she said to Clement, 6 weeks ago, would you have helped him?" Clement was very still. "That's not the relevant question," he said. "I think it may be the only relevant question." The silence in the room was the kind that happens when something true has been said and no one is ready to agree with it yet. She did not press. She refilled Mrs. Fenwick's tea and moved the conversation toward practical matters. The timeline Dodd had given, the documentation George still had in his possession, whether any of it might be negotiated. She had not studied law, but she had grown up in a house where money was managed carefully out of necessity, and she had a mind that was good at finding the load-bearing elements of a problem. By the time Mrs. Fenwick left, she was not staying the night. She had not been invited and had too much self-possession to impose. Nora had a clearer picture of the situation than either Clement or his sister-in-law seemed to realize. George had borrowed against expectations he didn't have. Dodd had a legal claim that was probably enforceable, and Clement, who could cover the debt, was being asked to do it for a brother he had not spoken to in any real sense in years, over a rupture that nobody would explain to Nora but that had clearly not healed. Clement walked Mrs. Fenwick to her carriage. Nora stayed in the parlor and listened to the sound of gravel under wheels fading down the drive. When he came back in, he stopped in the parlor doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I wasn't planning to." He came in and sat down. Not across from her, beside her, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. He sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor, and she waited, and the fire in the grate made small sounds. "George and I had a disagreement," he said finally, 4 years ago. "About?" He stopped, started again. "About what I owed him, and what he owed me. We both said things. Some of them were probably true, and some of them were cruel, and most of them were both." Nora said nothing. She was very good at being quiet in ways that invited people to continue. "He blamed me," Clement said, "for things that were partly my fault, and partly the fault of circumstances, and partly the fault of Catherine. His first wife's name. He said it like setting down something he'd been carrying for a long time. She was ill for 2 years before she died. I didn't." He pressed his mouth together. "I didn't do everything I could have. I believed the doctors when they said she was improving. I left for a business matter in the spring of that last year because they said she was improving, and George never forgave me for that. He said I chose everything else over her. He said I had been doing it our entire marriage." The fire popped. Outside, a wind had come up. "Was he right?" Nora asked. Clement looked at her sharply. "Not entirely," she said. "Was he right in any part of it?" A long silence. "The kind that cost something?" "In some part," he said. "Yes." She nodded. She wasn't sure what that was. It was more honest than she had expected. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in 14 months, and it landed somewhere in her chest in a way she would need to think about later when she was alone. The question isn't whether to pay the debt, she said. No. He sat back. The question is whether paying it means anything, or whether it's just managing a situation. Can it be both? He looked at her. Managing a situation, she said, is not nothing. George would still have his life intact. The relationship, you would still have the possibility of something. You can't reconcile with a man who's been ruined. There's nothing to reconcile to. He was quiet for a moment. Then, when did you get so practical? I have always been practical, she said. No one asked before. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a name for yet. She went upstairs shortly after. She sat at the window of her dressing room and looked out at the dark lawn and thought about Catherine, who had been ill for 2 years and had died while her husband was away, and who had arranged the furniture in this house in ways that had never been changed, and who was still here in some sense that Nora had been too careful to examine directly until now. She thought about Clement saying in some part, yes, and the way it had cost him. She thought about the fact that he had sat beside her, not across from her, and whether that meant anything, or whether she was the kind of foolish woman who made meaning out of chair placement. She thought, I have been living in this house for 14 months, and I have been so careful not to want anything that I have become invisible even to myself. She had not meant for this marriage to be this. She had not precisely meant for it to be anything else. She had been too young and too obedient, and too accustomed to her own wants being arranged around other people's needs. But she was 23, not 13, and she had a mind that worked well when she let it, and she had spent 14 months being patient and quiet and correct. She was tired of it, not in a dramatic way, just in the way you are tired at the end of a very long season of weather, when you have made your peace with the cold, and then one morning you wake up and realize you have been cold for so long that you have forgotten what warm felt like, and the forgetting itself is the thing you can no longer tolerate. The next morning, Clement was at breakfast when she came down. This was unusual. He was normally gone before she arrived. He looked up. He did not look away immediately. I sent a message to George last night, he said. She sat down. Mrs. Holt poured her coffee. Telling him what? Telling him I would cover the debt, and that he needed to be at Ashgrove by the end of the week. Nora added sugar to her coffee. And the rest of it? The rest of it can wait until he arrives. The rest of it has been waiting for 4 years. Nora? It was the first time he had used her given name without it being required by circumstance, she noticed. She kept her expression even. I'm not arguing with you, she said. I'm noting that the money is the simpler part. I'm aware of that. Are you? He looked at her again. That look, she was cataloging them now, the different qualities of the way Clement Ashgrove looked at his wife when she had surprised him, which was apparently more often than she had realized. I have been told, he said carefully, that I am better at managing problems than I am at addressing the things that caused them. By whom? Catherine, George. My father, before he died. He paused. Probably others who were too polite to say so directly, and do you think they were right? I think it is a significant character defect, he said, with such precise, dry precision that she found herself unexpectedly, almost smiling. Well, she said, at least you're precise about it. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite, but almost. George arrived on a Thursday. He was younger than she had expected, mid-30s, with Clement's coloring, but an entirely different way of inhabiting a room. Where Clement occupied space deliberately, as if he had measured it first, George filled it in all directions at once. He came in talking and did not stop, and he embraced Mrs. Holt before she could step back and called her by her given name and said the house looked exactly the same. Said it like a man who was not sure whether that was a comfort. He stopped when he saw Nora. You must be... He checked himself. Mrs. Ashgrove. Nora, she said. Please. He studied her in a way that was not unkind but was very direct. Then he nodded once, as if she had passed something, and held out his hand. George. She shook it. Behind her she heard Clement come in from the hall. The evening was not easy. It was never going to be easy. But it was, she thought, honest in ways that the house had not been honest in some time. George ate with the appetite of a man who had spent several weeks not knowing if things would be all right. He told 3 stories about his current situation, the business he was trying to build, the investors who had not materialized as promised, the optimism that had outrun the reality, and they were all versions of the same story, which was that George Ashgrove was a man of tremendous enthusiasm and limited caution, and he knew it, and he was not sure what to do about it. Clement listened. Nora watched Clement listen. After supper, she excused herself and left them together. She did not know what was said in the library that night. She fell asleep before she heard anyone come upstairs, and when she woke in the night the house was quiet. But in the morning, both brothers were at breakfast. George's eyes were red at the rims in the way of a man who had cried and was not embarrassed about it, which told her something about him. Clement looked, not lighter, exactly, but like a man who had set something down and had not yet decided whether to pick it back up. George left after 3 days. He kissed her hand when he left and said, with a sincerity that she found surprisingly affecting, that Clement had married above himself. Clement, standing 2 feet away, said nothing. But later, when the carriage was gone and they were back inside and Mrs. Holt had taken herself discreetly to the other end of the house, Clement stopped in the hallway outside the parlor and turned to look at her. "I want to say something," he said. She waited. "I know this has not been." He stopped. "Started differently. When we married, I was not in a condition to be a fair-minded husband. I don't think I acknowledged that to you, or to myself, fully." She said nothing. "I was managing a house and a grief and a rupture with my brother and what I thought was a reasonable solution to all of it, and I didn't." His jaw tightened. "I didn't consider sufficiently that the solution involved another person." "Me," she said. "You," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. 14 months, she thought. 14 months of quiet dinners and managed distances, and all the small daily acts of a marriage that had the form of itself but not the substance. "What do you want from this?" she said, going forward. "From the marriage." He blinked. She did not think anyone had asked him that directly in a very long time. "I want..." He stopped. "I don't know how to answer that in a way that doesn't sound like more management. Try." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to know you, actually. I want..." The words came out slower, like he was locating them one at a time. "I want to eat supper in a house where the person across from me is not waiting for permission to speak. I would like to know what you think about things, Nora. You have opinions. I have noticed, and I have been doing very little to deserve hearing them." She thought about what to say. She thought about the roses in the garden and the curtains she had never asked about again, and the dressing room window and the cold she had stopped noticing. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right?" "I have conditions," she said. Not harshly, precisely. Something in his expression shifted. "Name them. I want to be consulted. About the house, about decisions that affect the household, about anything that will eventually require me to manage a consequence you've already made. I'm competent. I would like to be treated as if I am." He nodded. "I want to know about Catherine." She said it evenly. "Not everything. Not more than you're able to tell, but enough that I stop learning about her by accident. From furniture placement and things Mrs. Holt doesn't finish saying." He was very still. Then he nodded again, slower. "And I want," she said, "to stop eating quietly." He looked at her for a long moment, then something happened to his face. Not the almost smile from breakfast, not the polite, correct expression she had been reading for 14 months, something older than that. Something that was not yet comfortable, but was trying to learn how. "I don't think I knew you were," he said. "Eating quietly. I know you didn't. I should have." "Yes," she said. "You should have." They stood in the hallway for another moment. Outside, the October wind moved through the trees along the south lawn, and the light was going the particular gold-gray of late afternoon, and the house was quiet in a way that felt, for the first time, like something that could become a home, rather than something she was waiting to survive. "Supper is at 7, he said finally. "I know when supper is," she said. "Yes." The corner of his mouth. "I suppose you do." She went into the parlor. He went toward his study, and when she heard his footsteps actually pause briefly, as if he was standing in the doorway of his study thinking about something, she looked down at her hands, and thought, that is something that belongs to me. It was not love yet. She knew enough about herself to be honest about that. But it was the beginning of the space where something might grow, if they were both careful, and both honest, and both willing, for the first time, to try.